Hey guys, just want to make a quick announcement that this video is brought to you by Squarespace once again. It's one of the best platforms for creating online stores and websites, so stay tuned to find out more later in the video. The League of Legends community tends to agree that some of the new champions are very overloaded, having way too much stuff in their kit compared to champions of old. And at first glance, it's hard to disagree with that statement. If you were to compare Aphelios or Yone to the likes of Garen and Blitzcrank, you'd be hard-pressed to believe they're even in the same game. But there were a few champions that were around even way back in the day that gave off the same impression of overloaded kits, notably because they had twice the number of abilities. Today we're going to be talking about Shapeshifters in League of Legends and discussing why they're no longer being developed anymore. Shapeshifting is, as it sounds, a shape that shifts or changes. Archetypally speaking, shapeshifters are characters with the ability to alter their existing form, and in video games that can extend beyond their appearance, affecting their gameplay and even playstyles. In League of Legends, there's a small group of champions that possess the ability to transform, which grant them a new set of abilities depending on what form they're in. At the time of this video's recording, we have only 6: Jace, Elise, Nidalee, Kled, Rek'Sai, and Gnar. To varying degrees, each of them have 2 distinct forms that they swap between either voluntarily or by force, which carry their own playstyles too. Now, there has been debate around if some other champions would fit under this category too, like Kayn, Viego, and Shyvana. Technically speaking, even though Shyvana's dragon form is a physical transformation, there's no real difference in how she plays. Her dragon forms Q, W, and E are more reminiscent of empowered abilities such as Karma's Mantra, Pantheon's Mortal Will, Rengar's Ferocity, or Renekton's Fury. Viego does have the ability to transform and acquire new abilities, but given that he turns into other champions, those abilities are not his own, so he's not a genuine shapeshifter. Copycat is a better word. Lastly, Kayn doesn't count as a shapeshifter since he has the same basic abilities whether he goes Rost or Shadow Assassin. That, and he's permanently in that form for the rest of the game, not allowed to swap between the two. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be focusing on champions that actively switch between different forms, and yes, I will touch on Aphelios later, so bear with me for a bit. Even though they play vastly differently from each other and come equipped with varying tools, there are some design similarities between each one, namely the 3 original shapeshifters. For one, they usually swap between ranged and melee, with the ranged form taking precedence over melee in the neutral game, while the melee form is designed for bursts or all-ins. At the current moment, there's no shapeshifter with 2 mutually exclusive playstyles. Their 2 forms are designed to work around each other. That said, the power budget distributed between the 2 forms is not uniform. There's usually one that's marginally better in either pressure or impact. For Jace, his melee form is considered the stronger of the 2, Nidalee and Elise's animal form as well. Gnar's mega form is obviously the stronger one, same for Kled's mounted versus dismounted, and Rek'Sai's unburrowed form is of course the one with more damage. For those who can shift between their 2 forms at will, it costs them an ability slot, which is usually their ultimate, meaning they don't have access to a conventional ultimate the way normal champions do. I mean, that's fair considering they have 6 basic abilities instead of 3, so they naturally have strong early and mid games where base numbers and stats are more important. However, it comes at the cost of shapeshifters usually falling off towards the late game. Even though they have more abilities than normal champions, there's never a point in time where they can use all of them in concert, and those abilities are individually weaker to even out the fact that these champions have 2 Qs, 2 Ws, 2 Es, etc. This does apply to Rek'Sai, Gnar, and Kled too. Each of them have ultimates, but they do fall off in the same way despite this. Dismounted Kled and Mini Gnar are more of a handicap than an actual form, and Rek'Sai's W is her transformation, so she still pays the ability cost, one that isn't made up by her ultimate. Okay, exposition aside, the title of the video says why they disappeared. They always were a niche archetype, but shapeshifters were well known for being dynamic and versatile picks that had very high skill ceilings and good presence in both solo queue and pro play. Lately though, it feels like it's been forever since we've seen one. The last shapeshifter was Kled back in mid-season 6, over 5 years ago. Unlike Wardens and Poke champions, existing shapeshifters have enjoyed relative popularity, and there are countless places Riot could take inspiration from when it comes to making new ones. So you would think they would jump on any chance they can get to make more shapeshifters, or at least 1 or 2 more within the past decade. I'm not sure if this is their reasoning, but I went through all the answers I could think of, and I believe I have a good theory behind why they abruptly stopped making them. Long story short, is because shapeshifters are a really big headache to design and maintain because of the way League of Legends was structured. Due to having 2 different sets of abilities, it makes them extremely hard to design by default, without running into both playstyle and balance issues. Since you're only allowed to have 1 set of equipment, the 2 forms have to be congruent. Most of the time, in other games, you'll run into a character or class that has 2 different stances, usually an attack stance and defense stance. Good example of this would be Aegislash, who has a shield form and sword form with vastly different playstyles. The reason it's allowed to work is because Aegislash's base stats change between its two forms, allowing it to be effective as both a wall and sweeper. It's pretty much like fighting two different Pokemon. Matter of fact, it was so broken, it was one of the very select few non-legendary Pokemon to have the distinct honor of being placed in Uber's tier. And for those of you who have no experience with competitive Pokemon, Ubers is the highest tier in Pokemon and not an official competitive format, essentially they're banned. It's almost exclusively home to the big legendaries like Rayquaza, Dialga, and Mewtwo. When you see a non-legendary Pokemon like Aegislash in Ubers, that's when you know something is seriously busted about them. I say all this because shapeshifters are inherently difficult to design fairly no matter what game they're in. But back to League of Legends, in this game, items play a huge role in determining a champion's playstyle. The bulk of their power comes from items and not base stats. Therefore, the concept of defense converting into offense is close to impossible to pull off since your items stay the same irrespective of what form you're in. Jace, Elise, and Nidalee, for instance, are typically seen building full damage, and even though the three have separate ranged and melee forms, they play as assassins or skirmishers, and their ranged abilities consist of poke damage and or setup, such as Elise's Cocoon, Jace's Shock Blast, or Nidalee's Javelin Toss. In Rek'Sai's case, her burrowed form is more for utility, while her unburrowed form is for damage. If you were to make the suggestion that shapeshifters should have two separate item sets, that would also not be a good idea, because it effectively makes them the most overpowered champions in the game. Even though you have to give up an ability slot to change forms, which is usually the ultimate, your total ability selection almost doubles, and more importantly, so does the number of options you have. If you're under a lot of heavy fire, you can switch to your tank form and soak up all that damage, then switch back to damage form and wipe the floor with everyone. It's the only thing preventing shapeshifters from completely breaking the game, and they're already tough enough to balance. That applies for other types of combinations. If separate inventories were enabled, it would give way to a bunch of different design themes that would all turn into balanced nightmares. You could have a shapeshifter with one form dealing physical damage while the other does magic. You can have one form be artillery mage and the other form is a diver. You might have an enchanter that can turn into an assassin. I'm guessing a lot of you are about to go into the comment section and say, what about Gnar? He has a squishy, pokey, evasive DPS form and a hard engage all-in tanky burst form. Correct, but even though he has differing playstyles, they're not equal in capacity like I said before. Everyone knows Mega Gnar is vastly stronger and more dangerous than Mini Gnar, which is why it lasts only 15 seconds. The base stat changes depending on what form are the closest thing you can get to playstyle differences in this game. But most of the time, Gnar builds a mixture of health, damage, and durability to prioritize his Mega form. Almost never does he build on-hit DPS the way his fellow Yordles Teemo or Kennen might on occasion. Sure, a plausible solution to allowing mutually exclusive playstyles would be to lessen the individual strength of each form, but that's exactly what causes champions like Azir to be in the state that he's in. He's simply too good at too many things. He's got ranged DPS, he's got engage, he's got disengage, he's got zone control, he's got poke damage, he has siege potential, he has wave clear. All of this stuff makes it so he has to have one of the worst early game experiences of all time to make it difficult to reach that master of all status. If you expand on a champion's options, balance dictates that those options have to be lower in efficiency or at least much harder to achieve to keep them fair. Additionally, nowadays, a champion's playstyle greatly revolves around a singular gimmick. If you compare the three modern shapeshifters with the three old ones, what is one thing that puts Gnar, Rek'Sai, and Kled apart from Jace, Elise, and Nidalee? The answer is a main form. Gnar's transformation is obligatory and happens whenever his Rage Gene fills up to max. Even though he stays Mini Gnar for most of the game, his main form is Mega Gnar, which has the bulk of his pressure and impact. Mini Gnar's kit is designed to allow him to safely stack up that rage, hence why he has long range poke, a movement speed buff, and escape tool. Kled's transformation is also obligatory and happens whenever Skarl is depleted of its health. His main form is when he's mounted and carries most of the power in his kit. Dismounted Kled has only one real option: get back on Skarl as quickly as possible. Make no mistake, he can still do some pretty serious damage with Pocket Pistol and Violent Tendencies, but we all know his main form is when he's mounted. Rek'Sai can transform voluntarily, but her strength lies in her unburrowed form. That's where all her damage is and such. On occasion, she might use Void Seeker to lock onto someone far away so she can use her ultimate, but for the most part, her burrowed form's primary function is to get her around places faster and keep an eye out for enemies with Tremor Sense. The reason I mentioned the main form is because even though shapeshifters have been pretty much discontinued, they do have a sort of spiritual successor. A few new champions bear some semblance of shapeshifting in their kit, but rather than giving them a completely new set of abilities and attributes, it would be more or less an extension of their current gameplay. Kayn, Aphelios, Kiana, and Rel. Each of these champions have a gameplay-altering property without exactly changing their form. Aphelios would be the most noteworthy of the four. The reason I didn't include him in the list of shapeshifters is because the only thing that changes is the weapon he uses to auto-attack. He doesn't go from range to melee, nor does he have two different playstyles. Regardless of what he's equipped with at what time, he still plays like a backline AD carry, if that makes sense. But we shouldn't discount the significance of his 5 weapons, each bearing its own unique function. Calibrum specializes in long-range attacks, Severum is for lifesteal, Gravitum is for lockdown, Infernum is for AoE damage, and Crescendum is for DPS. While he handles fights in mostly the same way, the different types of weapons vastly affect the outcome or trajectory of a battle. His main form is just, him. Aphelios doesn't turn into a humongous raging kaiju thingamadoohickey, he just switches his weapons, different from Jace who goes from range to melee. This approach allows him to tap into the shape-shifting theme without having to face nearly the same number of balance problems as traditional ones. What I mean by that is, if a shapeshifter is overperforming, it's pretty dang hard to pinpoint exactly what is causing that overperformance. People might complain that Jace's burst damage in hammer form is way too strong, but his cannon form has 2 things that can be responsible for that too. Transform Mercury Cannon causes his next attack to slash his target's armor and magic resist by a pretty significant amount, and Hypercharge can also empower his melee attacks too. Those might be the real problem and not actually Jace's melee abilities. Vice versa, if it feels like his ranged form is a bit too oppressive, it may not be the cannon's abilities but perhaps his melee form's ability to regenerate mana, or because of how hard it is to engage on him thanks to Thundering Blow being an instant get off me tool. Don't get me wrong, similar situations can definitely and have definitely happened for the likes of Aphelios, but because his playstyle doesn't change completely, it's easier to ascertain which weapons are overperforming even down to their 2 combinations. You guys remember all those clips of Inferno Moonlight Vigil exploding entire teams because they would take damage from the initial blast, but then the splash damage from all of their teammates? Those seem like a pretty obvious question of numbers since his ultimate is dependent of everything else. That's one more thing, having an ultimate actually makes it easier to balance a champion. For 95% of the roster, your ultimate is your strongest ability, and it also holds a large portion of your power budget. Therefore, if a champion has an absurdly high win rate, the most reasonable place to start your search would be their ultimate. Without a major ability, it's much more difficult to buff or nerf shapeshifters because you might be targeting the wrong part of their kit. Mind you, I'm not saying Aphelios wasn't a balance nightmare during Season 10, he's probably more confusing to balance than Elise or Nidalee, but it's certainly the case for Qiyana's different elements, Rel's mounted and dismounted form, or Kane's 2 permanent forms. Truthfully, it does suck that shapeshifters were discontinued. Don't get me wrong, I find Jace, Nidalee, Gnar, and Elise to be some of the most annoying champions I've ever seen, but their designs are very unique, and there's a lot more that can be explored if champions could have 2 distinct forms. It's just that shapeshifters conflict with the way League of Legends was designed from the start, what with most champions being balanced around 1 passive, 3 basic abilities, and an ultimate. If there's a possibility that we might see one in the near future, they'll probably go down the route of either permanent forms like Kane or weapon changers like Aphelios. I'm not sure if they can do another version of Elise, Jace, or Nidalee. However, despite making it sound like designing shapeshifters is a balanced nightmare waiting to happen, it isn't impossible. The constraints set in place just limit the amount of creative agency in making them, and if we were to lift those constraints, such as the aforementioned having 2 separate item sets, that's going to be a very risky move. Even so, I still think we haven't fully exhausted the range to melee approach, but given how much Gnar and Jace are disliked, I don't think too many people will be excited to hear about another range to melee shapeshifter. Now before we wrap up the video, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. If you're trying to start a business, blog, online store, or website of any sort, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that lets you easily make a professional and polished first impression. They have some of the best user interface and usability I've seen from a website maker, and they simplify the website making process so you can upload images, videos, add web pages, and even member areas to allow exclusivity. Even if you have zero knowledge about designing websites, the platform offers a wide array of templates so you can design websites in any way you want, on top of being able to customize the layout of each page to suit your needs. Also, for your convenience, they do sell domains so you can buy one to link to your page as opposed to going to another place. If you're thinking about starting a business, a club, an organization, or online presence, I highly recommend Squarespace. They're one of the big names in the website building world, and to help you get started, check the link out on screen or click the link in the video description to get a free 2-week trial and 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. What do you guys think? Do you like shapeshifters in League, or do you think they're overpowered because they have 6 abilities as opposed to the usual 4? Let me know in the comments down below. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more content like this. Don't forget to follow me on my socials and join my Discord server. And finally, check out my other champion group discussions if you haven't yet. But until then, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.